Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous material into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, I founded the Congressional Stop Project 2025 Task Force, and some people might be curious as to why I did that. Well, I have served in Congress for almost 12 years, and throughout that period, I have seen a lot of wild and extreme antics from across the aisle. I have seen some of my colleagues try to chip away at our civil rights and roll back decades of progress. I've seen the chaos and the division that Donald Trump has infused into our politics, including violent rhetoric and extreme policies that are completely beyond the pale of anything that has ever tried to pass for conservatism. But in this entire time, I have never seen anything that compares to the threat to our democracy, to our individual rights, to the well-being of most Americans, a threat that is posed by Trump's Project 2025. I encourage people to look it up and to read it, because anyone who familiarizes themselves with Trump's Project 2025 can see for themselves what an unprecedented takeover plan this is, to gut critical checks and balances that hold our democracy together, to roll back fundamental rights, to erode church-state separation, impose draconian policies that are deeply unpopular with most Americans, all so that MAGA politicians can take unprecedented government control over the lives of every person who calls America home. You know, most Americans want nothing to do with this dystopic authoritarian scheme. But our House Republican colleagues are so excited about it that they're not even waiting for a potential second Trump presidency. They are moving ahead right now to implement many parts of his Project 2025. Everywhere you turn in this Congress, extreme MAGA Republicans are working straight out of the Project 2025 playbook. We're seeing it in committees, in press conferences, and every single day right here on the House floor. Climate action, protections for the middle class, social safety nets, and abortion rights, these have all been on the chopping block in this Republican majority. It's like they lifted their legislative agenda right out of the pages of Project 2025. Now, we believe sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that's one of the most important parts of our task force's work. So our Stop Project 2025 task force, many other members of the House Democratic caucus as well, have been focused on doing something very simple but very important, showing people what Project 2025 actually says, bringing it out of the shadows, making sure every American knows the truth about what Trump and his allies here in Congress are planning and, in many cases, already trying to do. It's important to think about how a potential second Trump presidency would be very different. He now has absolute immunity thanks to his extreme radical Supreme Court. We know that he will not have adults in the room next time around. His administration would not have any institutionalists pushing back against his dangerous agenda or his authoritarian impulses. And unlike the chaos and lack of planning that marked his first presidency, he now has Project 2025, a detailed, strategic blueprint for not only advancing extreme policies, but for clearing away all checks and balances and guardrails that might stand in his way. Mr. Speaker, as disturbing as all of this is, it's important to remember we've only seen the tip of the Project 2025 iceberg, because on top of the 922 pages that they've actually published, which everyone can look up on the internet, they also have an extensive personnel program, including a resume database chock full of MAGA loyalists, a training academy to indoctrinate their self-described army of political operatives. These are the people that they hope to repopulate the federal workforce with after they have purged tens of thousands of civil servants. These things are happening right now. And perhaps the most concerning part is the secret fourth pillar of Project 2025. They've acknowledged its existence. Members of the Heritage Foundation have described it as being too controversial to actually share with the public, so they haven't published it. It is the unreleased playbook outlining the steps that Trump would take in his first 180 days in office. And Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and I have reached out to Heritage in recent weeks, demanding that they come before Congress to discuss this secret part of their plan, release it so that the American people can actually read it. And to no one's surprise, the architects of Project 2025 have ignored our request. But we think the public deserves to know what executive orders, emergency declarations, and other presidential directives have been secretly prepared for Trump to make good on with respect to his vow to be a day one dictator. So today, our Stop Project 2025 task force has launched a tip line to gather any and all information we can about the hidden fourth pillar of Project 2025. You know, given the extremism we've already seen in the published parts of this plan and the evasiveness of Heritage and its coalition, we think it's important to turn to the public to get more information on this. So anyone who may have seen or authored or come across any part of the secret fourth pillar of Project 2025 is encouraged to share what information that they may have access to through our dedicated tip line. We're going to keep doing everything that we can to uncover their full agenda to stop this government takeover scheme on behalf of the majority of Americans who want nothing to do with this dystopic plan. So I would now like to yield to Representative, who am I? I'd like to yield to my colleague, the Assistant Democratic Leader, the gentleman from Colorado, Joe Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, let me just say a word of gratitude to my colleague, the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, for founding and chairing the Stop 2025 Task Force. His determined leadership on this particular issue has been incredibly important, and I and so many of my colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus are grateful for it. Right now, Mr. Speaker, Americans across the country are looking to leaders in Washington to solve problems, to address issues of critical importance facing our families and our communities across this great nation. They're looking to us to lower costs, to grow the middle class, to build safer communities, to put people over politics. Unfortunately, Project 2025 calls for the very opposite. As H.Res. 1368 makes perfectly clear, extreme MAGA Republicans have authored a radical playbook that would harm middle-class families by raising taxes, allowing employers to stop paying overtime, repealing the Affordable Care Act, ending Medicare as we know it, opening the door for disastrous cuts to Social Security, and raising the retirement age, making workers work longer for less. Mr. Speaker, my colleague from California said it so well. The American people do not want this plan. They don't support it. That much is clear. And I would encourage my House Republican colleagues to abandon the reckless plans articulated in Project 2025, which they have attempted to legislate on the floor over the course of these last several months, often throwing the House into chaos during the course of the 118th Congress. I would encourage them to instead work with us collaboratively on policies that put people over politics, on policies that create an opportunity economy, on policies that ultimately ensure that our brighter days are ahead. The stakes are simply too high. And of course, Mr. Speaker, a great way to do precisely that would be to work with us on a bipartisan path forward to keep the government funded, to keep the government open, so that we can get back to the business that the American people expect us to consider on the House floor. With that, Mr. Speaker, I want to yield back to the gentleman from California and again thank him for his leadership on this task force.
And I want to thank the gentleman from Colorado and agree with him. You know, many of our Republican colleagues have been trying to disown Project 2025. Certainly, their nominee, Donald Trump, has been trying to do that in ways that are quite implausible. But it seems to me that anyone who wants to show that they do not support this radical authoritarian scheme, Project 2025. We're giving them a chance to do that with this resolution, and we invite them to join us. So at this point, I would like to yield to my colleague, Representative Plaskett.
Thank you so much to the gentleman from California. Thank you for convening us here. Thank you that you are not swayed by the rhetoric that is happening outside, that is pulling people's attention away from this dire threat to our democracy that is Project 2025. This is, in fact, a blueprint, as you have said and so many others have said, to the culmination of years of planning by Washington, D.C.'s shadiest conservative groups, shadiest individuals, to upend the structures, institutions, and indeed the basic rights that actually make America great. Project 2025 is a playbook for Donald Trump's second term and a plan for the destruction of America as we know it. Despite flashy headlines printed over American flags and men who give loud speeches about their love of freedom, this plan is in fact a destruction of our freedoms. This is a plan, in many ways, related to the Great Replacement theory, means to say that America should be a homogenous society, not recognizing that what makes this country so great is, in fact, not just our diversity, but our willingness to have the tug and pull of different ideas. I can remember when this House was a place where people compromised, where people negotiated, why we did not think that one was right or the other, that we tried to work together. Those days are long gone. And those of us who want to stick our heads underground and pretend that Project 2025 is not a reality, shame on you. Many of my colleagues who want to pretend that they don't know what this is, that they haven't read it, just because you haven't read it doesn't mean it's not real. This is a manifesto to ensure that Donald Trump has the ability to do what he wants to be, which is to be a king, to take away the rights that so many of us have, to restrict free speech in schools, to only allow far-right approved agendas and curriculum, to make sure that schools are a place where children are indoctrinated to one idea, not to many ideas, and let parents go back and have discussions with their children about those various ideas and instill in them what they believe is right. I'm a parent of 5 children. I do not have the fear that my children can hear other ideas because I know what I'm putting in them and that that's what they're going to do. These parents who are afraid of their children hearing about slavery, but also not recognizing that we have moved beyond that and are still moving forward and correcting ourselves, are doing a disservice to their children. It will cut Title I funding that supports low-income schools and result in budget cuts at over 60% of public schools across our country. Project 2025 and its tenets will eliminate Head Start, a program that currently supports 800,000 children across our country, increasing the number of Americans living in childcare deserts. It will erode our freedoms under the vague guise of making America great. And yes, because it's a Republican plan, Project 2025 calls for severe cuts to Medicare and Social Security. You know, we can't have a Republican plan without a cut to Social Security and Medicare and then hiding their hand and pretending like that was not a cut that they wanted. Project 2025 even calls for the elimination of the National Weather Service, making Americans effectively blind when preparing for potentially disastrous hurricanes and tornadoes. I know the people in my district in the Virgin Islands. I know even those who are dealing with wildfires in your district of California need to have these weather service to be able to predict these things. Republicans know that these ideas are not popular with real people of America. That's why they're hiding from the facts, obfuscating the truth, distracting the public's attention with wild claims right now to vilify minorities. That's why the former president and senators, his running mate, are distracting the media with bigoted racist tropes about legal immigrants in this country so that we are not talking about this, Project 2025. It's a playbook, and it is authored by individuals who worked very closely with Donald Trump in his last administration and want to execute this within 100 days to ensure that he has the full authority. I am an alumni of the Department of Justice as a political appointee. The idea that the Department of Justice would have to answer to the president is obscene. And we know that the Supreme Court has set the stage for him to be able to do that. Thank you so much for allowing us to illuminate and share just some of the things that are in this playbook for the first 100 days of a Trump administration. The more we let the cronies and individuals who've run this across without giving light to it and letting Americans know, the more we are likely to lose our democracy. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. I thank the lady, gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, and as I prepare to yield to the gentlelady from Vermont, I will just observe that my colleagues' comments caused me to think about the fact that we're gathered here on what our Republican friends have dubbed anti-woke week. Nothing is more Project 2025 than demagoguing and using wokeness as a pretext to try to roll back individual freedoms and civil rights and take away decades of progress. Our Republican colleagues can't seem to figure out how to fund the government and do the basics of governing, but they sure are good at finding time to demagogue on wokeness, and here we are. So with that, I'll yield to the gentlelady from Vermont, Representative Balint.
Thank you so much. Thank you for convening us to discuss this very important topic. You know, when I was in leadership in the Vermont State Senate, I saw the writing on the wall. I knew that Republicans were absolutely determined to overturn Roe v. Wade. We knew it was time to act to codify reproductive rights, not just in statute, but in our state's constitution. And at the time, some colleagues said I was overreacting. They said I was being paranoid, that I was being hysterical. They said the Supreme Court would never overturn Roe v. Wade because it was settled law. I can tell you it was not at all satisfying to be right. But in fact, overturning Roe v. Wade was just the beginning. The GOP is preparing for a possible second Trump term with a plan to end all access to abortion and contraception, all spelled out in the playbook, Project 2025. Trump's Project 2025 lays out plans to purposely misinterpret an outdated law known as the Comstock Act and use it to ban mailing drugs in medication abortions and any equipment or any materials used in surgical abortions. They even want to make it illegal to mail any information, period, about abortion. That's why House Democrats are taking action with a bill that I introduced this year with some very strong co-sponsors. The Stop Comstock Act would take outdated and unconstitutional aspects of the Comstock laws off of the books and protect a woman's access to abortion no matter what town she lives in across this nation. We have to use every tool at our disposal to protect access to abortion and all birth control options. This 150-year-old law was the result of one man's moralistic crusade against everything that he determined to be obscene, including information on abortion and contraception. Republicans know that voters don't support a nationwide abortion ban, so they will misuse this law and bypass Congress to get their way. And make no mistake, Project 2025 is not about building a future that Americans want or that they've asked for or that they need. It's about taking us back to the 1870s. Congressional Republicans and their allies in state houses across the nation are out of step with Americans. Americans want the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, and they want these freedoms guaranteed. No matter how much the former president and House Republicans pretend that their views are moderate, their actions tell us something very different. They have shown us through legislative action that they will continue to enact extreme policies, policies that I will remind you again, that the vast majority of the American people do not want, and policies that put women's lives at risk. Overturning Roe v. Wade was the next step in their plan to ban abortion in this country, and they don't appear to care how this hurts women, how this hurts families. Donald Trump has repeatedly bragged about being the guy who ended Roe v. Wade, a decision that has cost lives, literally cost lives, and left women desperate for urgent medical care. One of the masterminds behind Project 2025 is a man named Jonathan Mitchell. You may not know this name, but you certainly know his work. Mitchell helped develop Texas's strict anti-abortion law, SB 8. He concocted the very disturbing, quote, enforcement mechanism that allows private citizens to bring lawsuits against those who violate the statute. It's a law that encourages neighbors to spy on each other and calls upon Americans to turn in healthcare providers who rightly and bravely put women's health and safety above extremist policies. I can't even believe I'm saying this in this country, in this year. I can't believe that this is where we are. And his intent to misuse Comstock could not be clearer. He said, quote, "We don't need a federal abortion ban when we have Comstock on the books. There's a smorgasbord of options," he said. These plans spelled out in Project 2025 are sinister, and they have very real consequences, which is why it's so important that we gather tonight to shine a light on this extreme plan. It's time Republicans abandon their obsession with controlling women's bodies and stop using legislative action to slip parts of Project 2025 into House bills today. The American people do not want that. Democrats see this. We are standing up for you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I am mindful of the fact that many are saying that the American people this year are facing a choice of going forward or backward. Well, nothing speaks more to that than the fact that Trump's Project 2025 would dust off the old morality codes of the 1870s and impose them against the popular will on all Americans. It just tells us everything. So thank you to the gentlelady, and I now will yield time to my colleague from Southern California, who has been a great champion for civil rights and many other core values, Congressman Mark Takano.
Well, I thank my colleague, Mr. Huffman, from the North Coast of California. North and South, whether North or South, we Californians value things like a woman's right to choose. We value basic civil rights. We value human rights. We value LGBTQ rights in California. So I thank him for hosting this special order hour to bring attention to the most anti-democratic agenda in the history of this country. Well, I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but it certainly is the most anti-democratic that I've known in my lifetime. I mean, I can think back to the last century when we had far less democratic institutions. We had slavery, of course, and that was way, way more anti-democratic. But this is very disturbing, what I see in Project 2025. Let us not mince words here. Donald Trump's Project 2025 is a manifesto for a potential Trump administration to undermine our democracy, to roll back our rights and freedoms, to enrich large corporations at the expense of working-class Americans. This 900-page document outlines specific extremist policies that include criminalizing abortion nationwide, ending overtime pay, repealing the Affordable Care Act, ending Medicare as we know it, and putting Social Security on the chopping block. As the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, I'm deeply alarmed by the disastrous impacts that Project 2025 would have on America's veterans and the care they get from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, the very, very first proposal in the VA section of Project 2025 would prohibit VA clinicians from performing abortions to protect the health and life of women veterans. It's the very first thing that was put into that section. And I know the person who wrote this section. So as much as the president is trying to run away from ownership, the very person who wrote this was somebody who worked in a very responsible position in the VA at the time. It reported directly to the secretary under Donald Trump, Secretary Wilkie. This section is unconscionable. Unconscionable. We have Republicans all across the country now claiming that they're for the exceptions. But the very first part of Project 2025 on the veterans section says that they would make it illegal or reverse Secretary McDonough's rulemaking on allowing for abortions to be available at the VA to the very women who wore the uniform of our country. Women veterans fought for our rights and freedoms. They fought for the rights and freedoms of all of us. But the very first thing the Republicans want to do is take their freedom to make decisions about their own bodies away. Trump's Project 2025 will hurt veterans and reduce VA to ruins. And I've already mentioned especially our women veterans. In order to execute its mission of serving America's heroes, VA needs to keep wait times low. And in order to keep wait times low, they need to hire sufficient medical staff and offer employees competitive salaries. The Honoring Our Pact Act, which I was proud to author, has already seen nearly 1.2 million claims approved in just 2 years. And yet, instead of bolstering VA with the necessary resources to ensure that all veterans get world-class health care that they were promised, Trump's Project 2025 would push more veterans out to for-profit care, which is far more expensive than VA direct care, to further a far-right agenda. Already, over a third of the Veterans Health Administration's budget goes to referring veterans into very costly for-profit private sector care. And as more veterans get referred out, the VHA will be forced to spend more money out of their budget. Now, I'm not opposed to referring veterans out to care when VA is not able to provide certain specialty care inside the VA. It's a very necessary part, but it has to be in the right balance, and we're reaching a tipping point right now where for-profit care is going to seriously jeopardize VA's ability to provide direct care. And that will mean reduced staffing, increased wait times, fewer upgrades to VA's aging infrastructure, and fewer new VA facilities, and many of our VA facilities date back to World War II. And that will mean worse care for our veterans. VA would become a skeleton or a shell of its former self if Project 2025 is enacted. And that's not all. Republicans on the Veterans Affairs Committee have introduced efforts this Congress in order to get a hard head start on Project 2025 initiatives. They're working to weaponize VA by politicizing nonpartisan jobs, undermine congressional oversight of veterans' health care, and prohibit VA from providing gender-affirming care to our trans veterans. Under Trump's Project 2025, VA will become nothing more than a payment processor for large corporations focused on maximizing profits rather than an institution that keeps America's promise to those who have served. This is an unacceptable outcome for veterans. We cannot allow Project 2025 to be implemented. I will work tirelessly with my Democratic colleagues to fight back on this radical extremist manifesto. Thank you, and I yield back to my colleague.
Thank you. And the gentleman is exactly right about what Project 2025 calls for with respect to the VA, but it's more than just the VA. If you read this 922-page manifesto, this theme of privatizing and monetizing runs throughout their authoritarian scheme. It applies to our public schools. It applies to our public lands. It applies to the National Weather Service and so many other things. The American people don't want this exploitation, this privatization and enrichment and monetization obsession that the architects of Project 2025 have.
We could just call this give America over to private equity. You know, just the whole thing is designed to enrich a small group of people. Thank you so much for your dedication.
I thank you very much, and I now am proud to yield time to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Mary Gay Scanlon.
Thank you very much. You know, we're here to discuss Project 2025, the extremist playbook to impose a radical right-wing agenda upon Americans. It's called Project 2025 because it's designed to be implemented by Trump and his allies if he returns to the White House next year. The authors of Project 2025 have even begun recruiting people to apply for jobs to help implement this scheme because, as they detail in Project 2025, they plan to fire career civil servants and replace them with partisans who swear loyalty to Trump rather than to our country or our Constitution, a move, by the way, that the former president tried to implement by executive order before he left office. When the authors of Project 2025 decided to publish their radical agenda, they must not have realized that their ideas are so extreme that Americans would reject them as being, frankly, un-American. So that's why the former president and many of those allies are now trying to distance themselves from Project 2025. But they can't, because their fingerprints are all over Project 2025, and nowhere is that clearer than in Project 2025's plan to ban abortion and restrict women's reproductive freedom. Because the truth is, the extremists who plotted with Trump to overturn Roe v. Wade were never going to stop there. Chapter 14 of Project 2025 outlines their plans. It was written by a member of the Trump administration, and you can read it yourself on pages 449 through 502. Project 2025 would impose a nationwide ban on medication abortion by revoking FDA approval of that drug. It would resurrect a 19th century law, the Comstock Act, to ban the mailing of abortion care materials and criminalize their use. Project 2025 would rip away access to basic contraception. It would end emergency room reproductive health care for women whose health and lives are at risk. Project 2025 would end IVF as it's currently practiced. It would require the government to monitor women's pregnancies and miscarriages. Project 2025 is beyond extreme. It's dangerous. Democrats will continue to stand firm and united against this radical agenda and to stand up for Americans' reproductive freedom, because we trust women to make decisions about their own bodies, not politicians. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady very much, and I'm glad she spoke to the so-called civil service reform element of Project 2025. They called it Schedule F. It's an innocuous sounding thing. But again, like so many parts of Project 2025, when you understand what it actually calls for, it is far more extreme than anything we have ever seen in this country. It calls for going through the entire federal workforce to root out anyone who's been associated with a DEI program in our federal government. Climate scientists and others are going to be purged. Anyone who somewhere in their life maybe donated to a Democrat. A complete scorched earth political purge that they've described as involving more than 50,000 people in the federal workforce, and then to repopulate the government. And, you know, if their problem is political people in government, they're going to repopulate with even more political people from these training academies. So as the gentlelady concludes, I just want to ask, do you think that this is something that the people of Pennsylvania want to see?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, it doesn't matter what aspect of our federal government you're concerned about. If you're concerned about clean air and clean water, the idea that they're just going to take out all the scientists and have political hacks deciding how many parts per million of poison can be in our water and air.
Food inspectors, air traffic controllers.
Absolutely.
Maybe a non-political civil service is actually a good idea, just like Teddy Roosevelt concluded that it was a century ago, huh?
That's the whole purpose, is to have experts making those decisions.
Yeah. I thank the gentlelady very much. And at this point, I would love to yield some time to my new colleague from Illinois, Jonathan Jackson, a man who you might say has civil rights and social justice in his blood, and I'm sure has some things to say about Trump's Project 2025.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Honorable Congressman Huffman, who also shares that lineage in his DNA of being a fighter for the people. Congressman Huffman, I thank you for convening us, bringing us together for this Project 2025 that we must discuss. Mr. Speaker, I rise today because we cannot allow the agenda of MAGA Republicans to go unaddressed and quietly into the night. On page 4 of Project 2025, it explicitly states that the goal is to get rid of terms like inclusion, equity, and diversity so that no governmental policy can consider these things when determining who gets a contract, who gets hired, what management looks like, or who gets helped by a particular policy or administrative agency. And I find this to be as tragic as it is interesting, because in a perfect world, we would not need diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that's not where we live. We live in the United States of America. And we also live in the material universe where it is impossible to undo 300 years of legal exclusion with just 50 years of making this country do what is right. And for those who say America is different now, let me remind you that America didn't include black people in the inherent opportunities that come along with being born into this great nation because she magically wanted to. It was those persons, the abolitionists and the civil rights workers and black Americans, who made America do it. That's why the civil rights movement enacted laws and policies and protections, because the whimsical nature of America. America's commitment to her own principles cannot always be trusted. It indeed can be thick on ideals and thin on deeds. And let us not forget that during the Reconstruction in the late 1860s, black people were given access to the mechanisms of power in this country. But then in the 1890s, America took it all back with the imposition of Jim Crow and segregation. Some people in this institution need to know America's history. And here again in the 1960s, African Americans made significant political and economic gains. And yet, here we are in 2024, living under the tyranny of a Supreme Court determined to roll it all back. Affirmative action on college campuses, gone. A woman's right to determine what can happen with her body, gone. And the tragedy of our current situation is that we don't know what's coming next. Laws and policies that require the inclusion of black people are not there to give us an advantage. They are here to make sure that we are not once again excluded because of the color of our skin by American law. Project 2025 was created by the same people who formed the so-called intellectual brain trust around the candidacy of Donald Trump. These are his advisors, and here's what we know. We know that Project 2025 wants to impose a national ban on abortion, prosecute political enemies, and eliminate the Department of Education. Just think about it. What would we do without a public education policy? Project 2025 wants to continue to ban books about slavery and civil rights movement and prosecute teachers and librarians for assigning them. This is insanity. Just think about the insanity that we're living in. MAGA Republicans believe that books are dangerous for children, but automatic rifles are not. Project 2025 openly declares that it wants to get rid of school lunches and the supplemental nutritional assistance program for families and children. Both of these are part of the social safety net that ensures that millions of people will continue to have dignity in old age and access to clean food and water. Project 2025 wants to get rid of it. Now, if it's okay to spend billions of dollars on bombs, but making sure millions of people don't starve to death is somehow completely out of the question, something is wrong. And please note that Project 2025 doesn't say anything, nothing about getting rid of poverty, but they have no problem with getting rid of the programs that help people deal with the fact that they are tragically poor in a country that has excessive wealth. But they want to leave poverty alone, but they want to undermine how people survive it. Project 2025 wants to allow employers to no longer pay overtime. So if your employer can demand that you work overtime, but they don't have to pay you the extra time for putting additional money into their pockets and making them rich, something is tragically wrong. Can you imagine being required to work extra hours without extra compensation? That too is in Project 2025. So essentially, Project 2025 says that you should be happy to have a job and that whatever your employer asks you to do, you should be happy to do. But we don't owe you anything beyond the minimum requirement of your basic paycheck. That's un-American. This is ridiculous, but this is what Donald Trump and the people around him want to do. Project 2025 is a complete disavowal of workers' rights. And if you think they're going to stop at eliminating overtime, then you are completely delusional and drastically out of touch with reality. This is not the language in the document, but I bet you all the money in my pocket against all the money in your pocket that health care will be next. They have been trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, for the last 12 years. Project 2025 wants to give wealthy corporations another tax break. It's not enough that multi-billion-dollar corporations got the biggest tax break in American history under Donald J. Trump. They want to give corporations more. Notice how one-sided this is. They want to give corporations a big tax break, but Project 2025 says nothing about increasing wages. Follow the wickedness of the logic. Corporations get bigger tax breaks so they can keep more money from the workers made by them. But the workers don't get to participate in the success of the corporation by having an increase in their wages. Project 2025 calls for an end to Social Security, a great safety net program. Goal 3 of Project 2025 says that only a nuclear family should receive governmental support. This is a part of the ill-fated logic of J.D. Vance and Donald J. Trump. So if you are a single mother raising your children or a grandparent raising your grandchildren, Project 2025 says that the government should not make you a priority and basically you are not a family. The policies and prescriptions of Project 2025 would lead to the greatest assault on Medicaid and Medicare in the history of this nation. This is what we are up against. This is why we are determined not to let it happen. We are determined to fight for what is right. We are determined to resist. And once again, I'd like to thank the Honorable Congressman Huffman from the great state of California for championing this cause, for calling us out here tonight. I thank you for your undying commitment to our American democracy and your fight for what's right. I yield back.
I want to thank the gentleman from Illinois for speaking to the extremism and cruelty of Trump's Project 2025 so eloquently. And you're exactly right that health care is in the crosshairs. One of the many ways in which Project 2025 would take us backward on health care is by mandating that the default for Medicare would be Medicare Advantage. They like that because they can monetize it and make a lot of money on it, right? But it absolutely is expensive. It is accelerating the demise of the Medicare Trust Fund. They want to repeal the prescription drug reforms that we've been able to pass. The first time we've been able to stand up to Big Pharma in decades. We are saving Medicare billions and billions of dollars. We're saving consumers so much money already, and those savings are going to grow and grow in the years ahead. All of that goes away under Project 2025. So it's bad for the pocketbooks of the American people, bad for health care, and bad for the Medicare Trust Fund and Medicare itself. The gentleman's exactly right.
Thank you for your outstanding leadership, Congressman Huffman.
Thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, House Democrats are going to continue to shine a bright light on this document. The American people don't need to take our word for it when we talk about the extremism and cruelty and other impacts that Trump's Project 2025 would have. They can read it themselves. It's online. Look it up. And the more people read it, the more they understand it, the more we know they're going to want nothing to do with it. The best way to stop this terrible agenda is to just make sure people know about it and understand it. And so with that, we're grateful for this opportunity to discuss it, and I will yield back the remainder of my time.